For declined. I call on Government Order of the Day number 1.
Climate Change Response, Emissions Trading and Other Matters Amendment Bill, third reading.
The Honourable Tim Grosser.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the Climate Change Response, Emissions Trading and Other Matters Amendment Bill be now read a third time. Now, I want to make some formal comments about the process and then end with some more personal comments about some of the issues that have been raised in debate over what has been almost a 2-year process of consultation since the Honourable David Kegel was appointed to start the process. So, as I said, this does reflect, Mr. Speaker, a long and comprehensive review. It generated significant public debate, and I do want to thank all of those who have participated and engaged constructively with the review and subsequent amendment. I also want to acknowledge the excellent work of and quality advice provided by New Zealand officials. Thank the Honourable John Banks and the Honourable Peter Dunn for their support of and contributions to the bill. It began, as I said, sir, in December 2010 with the appointment of the Honourable David Kegel to chair an independent panel. That panel received 162 submissions on their issues paper and presented their final report to my predecessor in June 2011. In response to this report, the government outlined proposed amendments to the ETS in April 2012, and following a number of general meetings in Hui around the country, received 359 submissions from the public. Following from the first reading, the Finance and Expenditure Committee received 758 written submissions from interested groups and individuals, and the Select Committee heard in person from the 73 submitters amongst those who wished to be heard. The committee reported back to the House on 17 October this year, and the bill has now had its second reading and has passed through the Committee of the Whole. Overall, I'm pleased that following this long and comprehensive process, the bill meets the government's 3 objectives for the scheme. First, that the amendments improve the operation and administration of the ETS, and I thank the Select Committee for their contribution to recommending changes to the bill. The changes that they've introduced have brought more flexibility into the ETS, specifically relating to the exportability of forestry units, a levy rate for synthetic greenhouse gases, and eligibility criteria for offsetting. Secondly, by providing flexibility to cater for various potential international outcomes in the period from 2013 to 2020. And third, Mr. Speaker, to support the government's economic growth priorities more effectively. I appreciate some sectors looking to sell carbon credits would like to see a higher carbon price to incentivise greater participation. I'll make some observations on that in a moment. However, given the global climate in terms of the international economy in this case, the government had to make some tough decisions to not artificially inflate the short-term cost of the ETS to households and businesses. Now, let me pass now to some more personal comments on this, as I say, extraordinarily protracted debate in the country that's taken almost 2 years, Mr. Speaker, to conclude, to reach this point that we are today for the third reading. And I think what has actually confused much of the debate, Mr. Speaker, is that the final stages of this very long, drawn-out process has coincided with an extraordinarily low international carbon price. And let me make this very clear. In my view, our Cabinet might well have taken a different set of decisions if we had seriously believed the international price would forever remain at this extremely depressed level. But actually what this debate has always been about, and I do know there's at least one member in the opposition, I won't mention who fully understands this point, but for political reasons has chosen to conflate the two issues. The debate this bill is about the structure of New Zealand policy. It is not a debate about the international price. And we have inherited the broad structure from the previous government, and after a lot of internal debate that is all on the public record, this government decided to carry through the structure but take some of the speed off the speed at which it's going down what I call the climate change highway. Why? Because we campaigned quite explicitly on the basis of the formula that we wanted New Zealand to play its fair share, but not to lead the world. And much of the debate that I heard in committee and I've heard around New Zealand has really carried that debate on from the point of view of the election campaign, Mr. Speaker. Now, it's perfectly legitimate for Mr. Cunliffe or anyone else to continue to argue the alternative proposition that we want to lead the world, but that is not the position that we have taken, and it is not the position that I think is the right position for New Zealand, trying to establish a more robust economy and trying to compete in a very, very difficult economic environment and not pass costs on to households and businesses. So I think the fact of the low carbon price has confused much of the debate amongst some of our stakeholders. But this, I'm certain, will not pertain. What this debate is about is aligning New Zealand in a slow, progressive way to the world price. What happens to the world price is very largely outside our control. There's a second, actually also unrelated aspect around the environmental integrity of some of the units that are being imported. And here, actually, on a personal basis, I have great sympathy with those who are expressing concerns around this issue. The government previously moved against some units that were associated with some extremely, let me use ordinary slang, dodgy activities going on around HFCs around the world, which have a global warming potential of 23,000 from memory times CO2, and some utterly perverse outcomes seem to be possible, and I give full credit to my predecessor for banning the importation of those units once he had received technical advice. And because I'm personally very sympathetic to this concern about the environmental integrity of units, I've also recently asked for further technical advice, given heightened concerns around some other units. I will await that technical advice, and if that technical advice suggests that there is good reason to ban it, then that is the position that I'll be recommending to Cabinet. No doubt we'll consult stakeholders to make sure there's not an alternative view. So that is a different issue on which, from this side of the House, we actually share that concern, and we've demonstrated already a readiness to move that. And it's very important, Mr. Speaker, to the integrity of the scheme, because there still are climate change deniers out there in this country. Absolutely, I'm not one of them, but they are out there, and nothing will undermine support for a response on climate change more than this being revealed as a scam, which may in fact increase emissions done the wrong way. But the key point I'm making, Mr. Speaker, is that this is a scheme about a structure of a policy for the long term. And we, the future government of New Zealand, whoever that might be in 2015, will have an opportunity to look at the settings, but we now have got a stable policy framework. The second broad observation I want to raise is around the issue of this leading the world and how you would actually measure this. Well, I mean, obviously this is not a scientific matter, but the true facts of the matter is that only Europe and Australia and New Zealand, out of all the regions of the world, have got a policy in place that tries to address a comprehensive price on carbon. Only Europe and Australia and New Zealand. Now, we may be joined in 2015 by Korea, but it should be recalled that Korea's scheme, 95% free allocation for all energy exposed, all trade exposed industries, and no statement about what will happen in 2020 after that. So, at the moment, it's only Europe, Australia and New Zealand. Yes, there are promising pilot plants being talked about in China. Yes, there is a regional scheme in certain states of North America, rather interestingly referred to as a REGI, but this scheme is in serious trouble. There are serious legal challenges, and the price of carbon has fallen through the floor. So when people talk about this, it's really important to remember this cliche, Mr. Speaker, about distinguishing between talking the talk and walking the walk. And finally, let me conclude on agriculture, Mr. Speaker. There is not a country in the world that has put a price on biological emissions. We do put a price on processed agriculture, but we do not put a price on biological emissions, and that is a decision which the government, whoever forms the government in 2015, will take. What we have done is require compulsory reporting of biological emissions at the point of obligation of the processor level, and we will work with stakeholders to bring that back to this. But this is ahead of us, Mr. Chairman. And finally, while I'd like to expand on this, Fonterra, the biggest dairy exporting company in the world. Really, the Green Party in particular should reflect on where they're going. 20% reduction in carbon emissions is their target by 2020. By 2014, they won't pick up any milk from any of their suppliers if they haven't got a nitrogen plan in place. This is a company which is ahead of every dairy company in the world on sustainability. And it's about time people started looking at the facts, Mr. Speaker. I commend this bill to the House for its adoption.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. I call the honourable